Hello everyone and welcome. I'm excited to have you here today. We're kicking off with Mega Goal 1.2, focusing on Unit 7, You've Got Mail. The theme for this session is form, meaning, and function. Over the next few minutes, we'll explore how messages are structured, what they mean, and how they serve different purposes. So let's get started and dive into this interesting topic together. Today, we're focusing on some key language points that are essential for clear communication. First, we want to make sure we're using the definite article, the, correctly. Remember, the is used to refer to specific or known nouns. Next, we'll look at how to use singular and plural nouns properly, which helps avoid confusion. Then, we'll practice forming sentences with there is and there are, making sure we're using them correctly to describe what exists in a place. Lastly, we'll review how to complete sentences in the simple past tense using used to or would, which are useful for talking about past habits or states. These points are all about building a solid foundation in grammar and vocabulary, which ties into our overall theme of effective communication. So let's talk about when we use used to. This phrase helps us talk about past states or habits that are no longer true today. For example, if I say, "We used to live in New York when I was a kid," I'm describing a situation from the past that has changed. It's important to notice how we form it. Used to, followed by the infinitive of the verb. This structure is key to expressing past routines or conditions. You might also wonder, when did something change? For example, there didn't used to be a supermarket there. That means in the past there was no supermarket, but now there is. And a quick question you might hear. Did you used to have a garden? This helps us ask about past habits or states that might no longer be true now. So the main idea is that used to is a simple way to talk about past situations or habits that are different from the present, and it's a useful tool for reflecting on how things used to be. So what does don't happen anymore mean? It refers to habits or actions in the past that no longer occur. When we want to talk about these past habits, we use the phrase used to. For example, I might say, "I used to go swimming every Thursday when I was at school." That means I did it regularly in the past, but I don't do it now. Another example is, "She used to smoke, but she gave up a few years ago." Here, we're talking about a past habit that she no longer has. The key point is that used to helps us describe actions or routines that were common before but have stopped now. Remember, it's a useful way to connect past habits to the present, highlighting changes over time. All right, let's take a look at the affirmative form in English. When we want to talk about past habits or routines, we use this structure. Subject plus, used to plus the base form of the verb. For example, "I used to work very hard." Or, "I used to watch Disney cartoons when I was a child." It's a simple way to describe actions that were regular in the past but are no longer happening now. You can also say, "He used to walk to school every day." The key point here is that used to always comes before the main verb in its base form. Remember, this structure is only used in affirmative sentences to show past habits. So, when you're describing something you did repeatedly in the past, this is the form to use. It's a common and useful way to express past routines clearly and naturally. This connects to the overall theme by showing how we can talk about past experiences effectively in English. All right, let's talk about the negative form of used to. When we want to say that someone did not use to do something in the past, we use didn't plus used to plus the base form of the verb. One important thing to remember is that with didn't, we don't add ing to the verb. It stays in its base form. For example, if I want to say she didn't use to sleep early, I say, "She didn't use to sleep early." Notice how sleep is in its base form, not sleeped. Similarly, if they didn't use to play in the street, I say, "They didn't use to play in the street." This structure helps us clearly express past habits or routines that didn't happen in the past. Remember, the key points are use didn't, then used to, and follow with the base verb. This connects to the overall theme of talking about past habits and how to express them negatively. All right, on this slide, we're focusing on how to form questions using the past tense with used to. The key point here is that when we make a question, we start with did, followed by the subject, then the base form of the verb. Remember, no D at the end of did because it's already in the past tense. So the structure looks like this: did plus subject plus used to plus verb in its infinitive form. For example, did she used to wake up early? Notice how used to stays the same in the question form, and the verb is in its base form, wake. When answering, you can say, yes, she did, or no, she didn't. This used to form is really helpful for talking about past habits or states that no longer happen. It connects to our overall theme of understanding past routines and how to ask about them correctly. Just keep in mind that when turning these into questions, the key is starting with did and using the base form of the verb after used to. So on this slide, we're focusing on the phrase used to drive. This is a common way to talk about past habits or routines that no longer happen. For example, I might say, I used to drive a car, which means at some point in the past, driving was part of my routine, but maybe I don't do it anymore. The key here is the structure. I used to plus the base form of the verb, which in this case is drive. It's a simple way to reflect on past actions or states that are now different. When you see the sentence, I drive a car, you should fill in the blank with used to before the verb, so it becomes I used to drive a car. This pattern is very useful when you're talking about habits or experiences from the past, especially in contrast to the present. It helps us clearly communicate how things have changed over time, which is often a central theme in understanding language and communication. Today, I want to talk about a common way to describe past habits or routines. On this slide, we see the phrase used to work. This is a very useful expression when we want to talk about something that was true in the past but is no longer the case now. For example, in the sentence, she work in a shop, we need to fill in the blank with the correct form. Since we're talking about a past habit, we use used to followed by the base form of the verb, which is work. So the complete sentence becomes, she used to work in a shop. Now, an important point to remember is that used to helps us emphasize the difference between the past and the present. In this case, she used to work in a shop, but now, as the slide indicates, she works in an office. This contrast highlights how people's jobs or routines can change over time. So, when you're describing past habits or states that are no longer true, think of used to as your go-to expression. It makes your stories clearer and more precise, especially when explaining how things used to be versus how they are now. So here's a little example to help us understand how we talk about past habits. The sentence says, he not like broccoli when he was young. To complete this, we use used to. That means, in the past, he didn't like broccoli, but now his feelings might have changed. This is a great way to talk about habits or situations that were true in the past, but are no longer the case. Remember, used to is a key phrase when we want to describe past routines or states that are different from now. It's a simple but powerful way to connect past experiences to our current lives, which is an important part of mastering English. Did he used to cycle to school? That's a great question. When we talk about past habits, especially things that used to happen regularly, we often use the phrase used to. So in this case, we're asking if cycling to school was part of his routine before. The full question would be, did he used to cycle to school? This structure helps us clearly express past habits or actions that no longer happen now. Remember, used to is a key phrase for talking about things that were true in the past but aren't anymore. It connects to our overall theme of understanding how habits change over time. So, think about your own routines. What did you used to do that you no longer do? That's the power of this simple but important phrase. So in this slide, I want to clarify something important about using would and used to when talking about the past. You can see that we can use would in place of used to when we're talking about past habits. For example, I would go jogging every morning, instead of used to go jogging every morning. But there's a key point to remember. We cannot use would for past states. That means, if you're describing a situation or condition that was true in the past but isn't anymore, you should stick with used to. To put it simply, would is mainly used for actions, things you did regularly, while used to can describe past states, habits, and situations that are no longer true. Understanding this distinction is really helpful for getting your meaning across clearly and accurately when speaking or writing about the past. All right, let's look at used to. This phrase is used to talk about actions or situations that happened repeatedly in the past, but they don't happen anymore. For example, I used to live in Riyadh, but I moved to Al Hassa last year. It shows a past habit or state that has changed. You can use used to in statements, negative sentences, and questions. For example, I didn't used to walk to school, or did we used to have a big car? It's important to note that used to can be paired with any kind of verb, whether it's an action, like walking, or a state, like having a big car. For instance, I used to walk to school, and we used to have a big car. Now let's compare used to with would. Both can describe repeated actions in the past, but there are some differences. Used to is quite flexible. It can describe actions or states, and you can use it in statements, negatives, and questions. Would, however, is mainly used for repeated actions and is only used in statements, not negatives or questions. Also, would is only used with action verbs, not states. So, for example, you can say, I would go to the same beach every summer, but you wouldn't say, we would have a big car. Finally, remember that used to emphasizes habits or repeated situations that no longer happen, making it a useful way to talk about changes over time. This slide doesn't contain enough information. That's why we're moving to the next slide. All right, on this slide, I want to highlight the difference between saying, I used to live in London 3 years ago, and the incorrect form, I would live in London 3 years ago. As you can see, we omit the would here because used to is the correct expression for talking about past habits or states. Now, this leads us to the activity called Find the Fib, where you'll have to identify which statement is not accurate or doesn't fit the pattern. Remember, the key concept here is understanding how to properly express past routines or situations in English. This is important because mastering these subtle differences helps you sound more natural and confident when speaking about the past. And of course, it connects to our overall theme of improving your fluency and accuracy in everyday conversations. So, keep an eye out for the correct usage, and let's see if you can spot the fib. So, here's an interesting point about how we talk about past habits or states. On this slide, I've written, I used to be afraid of the dark, which is the correct way to express a past ongoing feeling or situation. Notice that I've omitted the word would here, which is another way people sometimes talk about past habits or repeated actions. For example, instead of saying, I would be afraid of the dark, which isn't quite right in this context, the correct phrase is I used to be afraid of the dark. The phrase, used to, clearly indicates a past state or habit that no longer applies now. Now the fun part here is find the fib. That means one of these statements isn't quite correct or sounds a bit off. So if you see, I would be afraid of the dark, that's actually a common mistake. It's not the best choice for describing a past state like this. This ties into our overall theme of how we communicate about past experiences effectively. Remember, used to is your go-to for past states and habits, while would is more often used for repeated actions or habitual past behaviors. Keep that in mind as we continue. So when we look at the phrase would deliver, it really highlights how in the past, people used to provide or bring something somewhere. Similarly, would read points to how folks used to read, perhaps books or newspapers, more regularly. Then, would find shows how searching or discovering things was a common activity. People used to find information or objects in different ways. Moving on, would print reminds us that printing was a major part of sharing information before digital methods took over. The phrase used to find emphasizes routines of discovery or research that people used to do. Used to deliver reflects how delivering messages or goods was a regular activity. When we say used to read, it reminds us of a time when reading was perhaps more frequent or different in style. Used to use points to habits of utilizing tools or technologies that are less common now, and would use shows a typical practice in the past. Used to print again emphasizes the printing practices of earlier times. Similarly, would take indicates the act of carrying or bringing something, and used to take highlights past habits of doing so. The phrase didn't use to use shows that there were things people didn't asterisk do in the past, perhaps certain technologies or methods they hadn't adopted yet. Moving to would speak, which demonstrates how verbal communication was a primary way of exchanging ideas, and used to speak again emphasizes past routines in conversation. Lastly, didn't use to have reminds us of how some resources or possessions weren't always available and had to be acquired later on. Throughout this slide, the key idea is understanding the difference between habits and routines in the past versus now, and how language reflects those changes. It all connects to how communication, information sharing, and daily activities have evolved over time. Now let's look at how we use there is with uncountable nouns. For example, we say there is milk in the fridge or there is some sugar on the table. You can also say there is ice cream on your shirt. The key idea here is that we use there is when we're talking about a singular noun or something uncountable. Remember, there is for singular things and there are for plural things. For instance, you might say there is one table in the classroom or there are 3 chairs in the classroom. If there's a spider in the bath, you say there is a spider. And if there are many people at the bus stop, you say there are many people. The main point is that we use there is, and there are to simply say that something exists. It's a very useful way to introduce or describe the presence of things around us. There are, and this is a simple yet important point to notice. When we look at the table, we see some chips. Now the key here is understanding the difference between there is and there are. Since we're talking about chips, which is plural, we use there are. So the correct sentence is, there are some chips on the table. This helps us correctly describe the situation and communicate clearly. Remember, the choice between there is and there are depends on whether we're referring to singular or plural objects. In this case, chips are plural, so there are is the right fit. This concept is fundamental because it connects to how we describe quantities and objects accurately in English. There is some milk in the fridge. Now, this is a simple example, but it really highlights an important point about using there is and there are correctly. When we're talking about something singular, like milk, which is uncountable, we use there is. So in this case, we would say, there is some milk in the fridge. If we had multiple items, like apples or bottles, we would switch to there are. For example, there are apples in the basket. Understanding the difference between these phrases is essential because it helps us communicate clearly and grammatically correct. And remember, this ties into our overall theme of mastering basic sentence structures in English. Getting comfortable with there is, and there are is foundational for building more complex sentences later on. So, always pay attention to whether you're talking about singular or plural items, and choose the correct form accordingly. So in this slide, we're focusing on how to correctly use there is and there are. Now, the sentence here is, there is a boy standing outside the house. The key point is to choose the right phrase based on whether you're talking about a singular or plural noun. Since we're talking about just one boy, we use there is. If we had multiple boys, then we would say there are. It's a simple but important rule for constructing sentences that describe the presence of objects or people. Remember, there is used when referring to one thing, and there are when referring to more than one. This helps make your sentences clear and grammatically correct, especially when describing situations or scenes like this one. Now let's look at how we use there is and there are to describe quantities. On this slide, we see the sentence, there is basket full of red apples. Here, because we're talking about a single basket, we use there is. It emphasizes that one basket contains many apples. Next, the sentence, there are 7 apples on the basket. Since we're referring to multiple apples, 7 of them, we switch to there are. This helps us correctly match the plural noun, apples. The key point here is that there is used when referring to singular nouns or uncountable nouns, while there are is used for plural nouns. Recognizing this difference is essential for correct grammatical agreement, especially when describing quantities in everyday situations. And remember, connecting these concepts helps us describe what we see clearly and accurately, which is fundamental in effective communication. There is a fundamental aspect we need to recognize about our project. There is a need to focus on understanding the core challenges before jumping into solutions. There is also the importance of engaging all stakeholders early in the process to ensure buy-in and support. There is a vital link between clear communication and successful implementation, which cannot be overstated. There is an ongoing opportunity to leverage new technologies that can streamline our workflows. There are also potential risks that we must identify and mitigate proactively. For this reason, it's crucial to have robust risk management strategies in place. And finally, there are measurable outcomes we should aim for to track our progress and ensure we stay aligned with our overarching goals. All of these points highlight how interconnected each aspect is to the overall success of our initiative. Now let's talk about the concept of plural. When we say plural, we're referring to more than one of something. It's a fundamental idea in language and communication because it helps us express quantities that are greater than one. For example, instead of saying book, we say books to indicate there are multiple books. Understanding plural forms is key because it affects how we structure sentences and convey meaning accurately. Whether we're discussing objects, ideas, or people, recognizing whether we're dealing with singular or plural helps us communicate clearly. This ties into the overall theme of our presentation, which is about developing effective language skills. Mastering plural forms is a small but essential step in becoming more proficient and confident in your communication. So, always pay attention to whether you're talking about one or many, because that can change the entire message you're trying to send. Today, we're focusing on the definite article, which is the. This small word plays a big role in English because it helps specify exactly what we're talking about. When we say the, we're pointing to something specific that both the speaker and listener know about. It's different from indefinite articles like a or n, which refer to something more general. Understanding how to use the correctly is essential because it sharpens our communication, making it clear and precise. Throughout this presentation, we've seen how articles help us convey meaning effectively, and the is a key tool in that process. So, mastering its use helps us become more confident and accurate in our language. Let's practice. The, 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 the. Now, as we go through this, I want you to focus on applying what we've discussed. Pay attention to how the articles, the and o are used, and notice the emphasis on clarity and precision. This practice helps reinforce our understanding of how important the correct use of these words is in effective communication. Remember, connecting these points to the overall theme of clear and confident presentation is key. So, let's keep practicing and refining our skills. Thanks so much for your time and attention today. I really appreciate you engaging with the material and exploring these ideas together. Remember, the key points we've discussed, whether it's the importance of innovation, collaboration, or continuous learning, are all about driving growth and success in our work. I hope you leave feeling inspired to apply these concepts in your own projects. Again, thank you for being part of this presentation, and I look forward to seeing how you put these insights into action.